Hi, everyone. So I'm going to speed through a bunch of stuff and go as fast as I can. So please, I'm open to as many questions as you have. I just packed a lot of slides in here, so I'm going to go kind of speedily. And I'll start with the Denver community goals because that's the foundation of everything that we work on at the city. I won't read this whole list, but I'll just highlight that the top three, equity, sustainability, and affordability, are kind of what the mayor has centered his final term around, and all of the other goals tie into those goals. They all act together to get us to what the community is aiming for. But we really can't have any of those things without the other things, right? So equity, sustainability, and affordability come together, and we need to treat all of the goals together in order to achieve individual goals. So the first thing that the mayor did in response to what the community was asking for was in July of 2018, he passed the 80 by 50 plan. There are over 100 cities in the US that have 80 by 50 plans. It's really easy to put one of these plans in place. It's essentially a commitment to lower greenhouse gas emissions 80% below 2005 levels by 2050. It's a lot harder to figure out how to do that. And so that's the stage we're all in together. Part of that involves the new buildings work that I'm involved in and that we're doing in CPD. And one of those pieces is the milestone of getting all new buildings in Denver to zero net energy by 2035. That doesn't mean that every individual building has to be zero net energy. It means an even level of effort across all of the buildings that gets them collectively to that goal. We're writing an implementation plan that details what that means exactly, because I know that that's a really vague way to define that. I promise you we do have a lot more behind that relative to metrics. But some of what I'll talk about today has to do with the IECC, the Denver Green Code, and the Green Buildings Ordinance, which are tools that we're using to help the community get to this goal. Why do we care so much? Well, buildings are responsible for 63% of Denver's greenhouse gas emissions. And between now and 2050, we will build 40% of the buildings that will be standing then. So the new buildings matter a lot. It's not just the existing buildings that we can pin this on. But at the same time, we're not just picking on the new buildings. There is ongoing work related to existing buildings. There's the Denver benchmarking ordinance that's been in place since 2016 that requires all of the buildings that are larger than 25,000 square feet to record their annual energy use. And that is a huge tool for us because we can see how buildings are actually performing. And then there are other programs that the climate group is working on relative to existing buildings. I just am not going to talk about that a lot today. Similarly, the climate group is working in conjunction with Xcel to get our grid changed over to renewably sourced. Xcel has committed to getting us to 60% renewably sourced by 2030, and then they believe that they can get us to 100% by 2050 with our help. And that's where the work on the buildings comes in, because we have to do our part. So we're focused on 4 core tenets for the 2035 Zero Net Energy New Buildings Plan. Efficiency and renewables are obvious ones that everybody knows about. The ones that we I think probably have a little bit more education going on about are electrification and grid stability. We need to get off of the fossil fuels, and we need to help to stabilize the grid so that Xcel doesn't have to build out 8 times as much capacity as we actually need because of the variability. But codes matter. The big green dot is energy codes. That's the impact of all of our buildings that are just code compliant. We love to point at the zero net energy buildings, and we need them because they are examples that show us what's possible, and we love that leadership. But our little collection of zero net energies, those pilot buildings, are the smallest overall impact on our energy use right now. It all acts together. We need those to show that we can do it in Denver, but we need all of the mainstream buildings that are following the codes to continually elevate their performance. So this shows Denver's goals, which is the green line, heading towards zero net energy in 2035, and where we are relative to that with the codes. In 2018, the national code is the orange dot with the blue dotted line around it, hovering, floating above Denver's goals. So IECC in 2018 didn't come close to supporting our goals. The black dot is where we got to with our amendments. So also not on track with our goals. The green dot is where we got to with our voluntary green code. So we're close with the voluntary green code. So what that tells us is, after the work with the committees, understanding what the community felt was achievable without tremendous effort, we were not on track. We have 5 code cycles to get to our goal, so we're going to have to work a little bit differently. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. Residential is the same story. So the Denver Green Code has an important role in this because it serves 2 purposes. One, it incentivizes buildings to voluntarily do more, and it gives us an outline of what the community's priorities are relative to all of sustainability, not just energy. But 2, it serves as a preview for things that we think will be able to move into the mandatory code in the next code cycle. So we are encouraging project teams to read the Denver Green Code even if they don't have a project that is pursuing that certification, because that is the opportunity. Now is the time to learn what's coming in the next code cycle to make it easy to comply when it's mandatory. Ultimately, from an energy standpoint, our goal is to get our community shifting focus so that during the design process, during concept design, when aesthetics are first put on the wall, there's a performance goal that sits on the wall next to it. That's a challenge that the AIA put out to the design community nationally several years ago. We have embraced that and believe that that would really benefit Denver and help us get to our goals. Because right now, we kind of sort of think about performance sometime during schematic design, maybe towards the tail end of it, and it's too late. The train has already left the station with whatever the building looks like and all of the other aspects that the team has fallen in love with. We also know that we can't just write a bunch of regulations at the city and impose a bunch of rules on the community and run away. That's not our goal. That would be a horrible thing to do. We work in conjunction with the community on everything that we're doing because the market and the regulations need to advance together. Otherwise, it all kind of falls apart. So part of that is IECC compliance and just complying with the codes that we have in place today. I put this slide up here because we have been fortunate enough to have been selected as one of 25 cities that are currently benefiting from $70 million donated by Bloomberg Philanthropies to 25 U.S. cities that are leading the way with energy performance. Over a 2-year period, we get to use this money, some of this money that gets pointed our way, to address issues that we have with buildings and transportation and our greenhouse gas emissions. So we've been using that in part to fund Institute for Market Transformation's visit out to help us with IECC compliance. They sent a representative in October who took a look at our plans reviews, the types of drawings that we're getting in from the community, our inspections, what's being built in the field, and just gave an overall report on how we're doing relative to code compliance and where our opportunities lie to do better. And it's great, and it's going to help us to adjust our practices in-house with our plans reviews, as well as our practices with inspections and the support that we give to the community. Because right now we have a whole host of IECC provisions in place that aren't being complied with, and our building performance is suffering. So we also have the green codes. Between the IECC and the green code, those are our tools, our primary tools that we've been focusing on in the last 6 months to support Denver's success. I already talked about the core tenets for 2035 zero net energy new buildings. We're writing an implementation plan this year that should be done by the end of the year that will lay the path for the next 5 code cycles and what we need to try to target in order to get to that goal. We can't write the code provisions now because we don't know what the technologies will be or what will be available to the Denver market. But we do know what we'll focus on, and that's the list on the right. And it's the usual suspects. It's the envelope, mechanical, service, hot water, lighting, and then testing and measuring out in the field, because a lot of buildings aren't being built to perform the way that the details would make you think that they were going to perform. And then renewables and accessories like electric vehicles, because we have the opportunity with our buildings to reach a little bit farther beyond the building performance and impact behaviors within the community or support better behaviors within the community. And we need transportation to switch over to electric vehicles as well. And then the last thing that I would say is we're trying to figure out the pathway, the easiest pathway to getting to an outcome-based evaluation instead of just looking at design and construction and then occupants do whatever they want to do. So the Denver Green Code expands on that and takes the perspective to a holistic perspective. So it's a similar deal where we can look at what our opportunities are, but it's energy, water, waste, the full life cycle impact of the building, embodied carbon, the materials, the occupant health, the consumption emissions, everything related to the outcome, not just the energy side. And so we're looking beyond the building with our green code to the site and to where things are sourced from, what the construction practices are, how the buildings are operated, maintenance plans. It's kind of new territory in some ways for the building department to start getting into some of these conversations, and so we're figuring it out and trying to lead the way so that our buildings can actually perform better. There are a whole bunch of other things that support this work. What financing opportunities are available in Denver. We know that in other cities there are some very creative financing opportunities for high performance strategies. Workforce development, where there are gaps in Denver's knowledge base. Incentives to get more building owners interested in building higher performance buildings. So like for the Denver Green Code, we're offering some incentives related to that. Communication out into the community, because we know that that's imperative. If we're going to keep ratcheting up the code requirements, we want everybody to know what's coming. We're kind of nervous about the people who don't know to ask, who aren't really paying attention. We don't want them to be caught off guard when we suddenly have, to them, it's a sudden change to more stringent codes for the next 5 code cycles over and over again. So we're looking at all of the factors that are involved in getting to a high performance outcome. But again, we're working with the community. And this year we worked with the community on figuring out our IECC amendments to the 2018 code. That was the first of our 6 code cycles. It was a learning experience. We considered each amendment by itself and whether or not it was attainable, and we got to where we got to. And what we realized is in the next cycle, we're going to have to set an overall goal. We'll have recommended amendments that would get us to that goal, and then we'll have to figure out with the committee, is that truly achievable? And if it's not, what are we going to do instead? But we still need to maintain the goal. So just really quickly, 2018 IECC amendments for commercial buildings and for residential buildings touch on really similar themes between the two. Air barrier continuity, it's been a big issue. Insulation, fenestration performance, thermal bridges. We grouped the R2 multifamily residential in with our commercial buildings because there were some loopholes the loopholes were allowing site lighting to go crazy, so we closed that loophole. And we started to scratch the surface on electrification. We addressed equipment performance, controls, lighting performance, solar readiness on buildings, and EV readiness. We addressed the prescriptive options as well as the performance options and calibrated the two so that we have an equal amount of stringency regardless of which performance or prescriptive option is selected for a project. And we looked at detailing, construction, testing, commissioning, and just raising awareness amongst building owners about how their buildings are performing and reporting so that we can ultimately get to an outcome-based outlook. We also introduced a pathway of compliance that is focused on actual energy use as opposed to energy use viewed through the lens of cost, because ultimately we have to care about the actual energy. Residential, I'm not going to go through the list. It's a very similar list. There are a couple of things that are residential specific, but overall, exact same priorities, exact same types of opportunities there as well. In the Green Code, we set this out, as I said previously, with a double purpose of providing an incentive for some buildings to provide leadership in the community and to act as a preview. There's an embedded stretch code in there, so following the Denver Green Code requires a building to get at least 10% better than current IECC with Denver amendments. And then there are a couple of different compliance options that I'll talk about that take the energy higher than that. The incentives this year are for the first 5 commercial projects that come in. Those are our pilots. And we're offering expedited permitting and reduced permit fees to those projects. We hope to expand on those incentives in coming years. It's just a matter of getting the priorities lined out with the community and then getting that support in place. So we're using the Denver Green Code as a learning opportunity for ourselves, where we can see which options get chosen and how interested the community is in different things, because there are mandatory as well as optional provisions in there. Whatever gets chosen the most shows us that that's the most cost effective in our community and the easiest to achieve. And then we'll be evaluating potential resources to provide support to the community in the areas that get chosen least, because that'll show that that's where the greatest challenges are. The Denver Green Code, as it's written today, we started from the 2018 IGCC and then worked with community stakeholders along with the New Buildings Institute, a whole slew of city staff, and the Mozingo Code Group to get to a very Denver-specific version. That was the goal, to make it attainable and doable in Denver. So the requirements are chapter specific. Each chapter deals with a topic. There are prescriptive as well as performance paths, just like other codes, other I-codes. And again, the key is that it's achievable in Denver. This is everybody's favorite slide. It talks about the 4 compliance options. The first one is complying with the IGCC modified to fit Denver as it's written today. But then we're also accepting LEED Platinum certification. It would be LEED version 4.1 Platinum. And then net zero energy with an all-electric building, or passive house design and compliance with all of the non-energy Denver Green Code chapters. So we love choices. We think that that's the best way for the market to find ways to do more. The next group of slides goes through the different chapters, and I'm going to just kind of zoom through them pretty quickly. There's a whole chapter for residential energy efficiency that sets ERI values and talks about the net zero energy approach for residential. There's a site sustainability chapter that deals with similar topics to what we see in LEED. I highlighted electric vehicles because they made their way into the site sustainability chapter and people don't always find them there. Water use efficiency deals with potable and non-potable water, site and building use, indoor and outdoor, measurement, as well as how much is being measured, how much is being used, water treatment, irrigation, low flow fixtures, kind of runs the gamut, and it includes provisions that relate to special features as well, because we see a lot of special features, especially on our multifamily residential. Then chapter 7 deals with the commercial energy efficiency, and that's where we see a performance requirement of 10% or better than base code, or to follow the prescriptive requirements. It tries to shift us over towards that outcome-based approach. It's not there yet. We will see that evolve in coming code cycles. Eventually we will get there. And there are provisions to make buildings on-site solar ready. We're not stressing the need to actually put the solar on the buildings necessarily, because we know that if the building is solar ready, the solar can come later. That's okay. If the first cost can't support it right now, it might be better to put that money someplace else. There are increased requirements on metering, because we've seen through the benchmarking ordinance, buildings that meter and report on their energy use are now using close to 4% less than they were before, just because they know, and that knowledge is helpful. And then there's the beginning of demand response, which we will have to work in conjunction with Xcel over coming years to evolve and forward and figure out what they need from us on. And then, of course, we have a whole slew of requirements that address performance of the envelope, and we require now air infiltration testing. We're not requiring buildings to meet a specific air infiltration rate necessarily. If the rate is too high, then we require remedial measures to be taken, but if the rate is still too high, we're not making people disassemble their buildings. In future code cycles, there probably will be penalties that get introduced for buildings that have too high of an air infiltration rate. So this is the learning round, because our community is not really used to measuring that, and we've seen that air infiltration can tend to be a problem on buildings. And then obviously equipment efficiency, duct leakage and insulation, lighting and appliances get in there too. And then chapter 8 deals with indoor environmental quality, because occupant health is a big deal, and we have an ongoing dialogue about VOCs in the building industry. We also have an ongoing air pollution dialogue here in Denver, right? So it's just addressing all of those things that people come into contact with day to day. And then we branch into materials and resources, and this is where we start to get a little bit beyond where the building department normally is used to digging in, talking about construction and waste diversion, and getting that reporting going, and how chasing down the recycling and regionally based materials and bio-based materials. So construction practices and then also operations practices matter, and we have those covered in chapter 10. Again, that's another area that we haven't traditionally been that involved in enforcement of, construction practices and what's happening on the site, the commissioning practices, the indoor air quality, and waste diversion tracking. Similarly, with operations, we're asking for a series of operations plans. Building operations typically happen after the CO and aren't someplace that the building department gets involved with, but the city can, and we are figuring out the mechanisms in conjunction with our climate team on how that will take shape, but that's in the Green Code too. At the end of the day, a building that complies with the Denver Green Code doesn't have to do anything additional for the Green Buildings Ordinance. It is considered to be in compliance with that as well. So a few quick outtakes from the first year with the Denver Green Buildings Ordinance and how that fits with the Green Code. I get that question a lot, so I did a little comparison for a couple of slides that just show the ordinance is mandatory for buildings 25,000 square feet or larger, existing as well as new. The Denver Green Code only applies to new buildings. It's voluntary, and it's a building of any size. A residential home can qualify for the Denver Green Code. The Green Buildings Ordinance is a manageable 20-page document. The Denver Green Code is a manageable book, so it takes a little bit more effort. They're both fully achievable. The provisions in both are fully achievable in Denver, but the Green Buildings Ordinance is mainstream achievable. The Green Code takes a little bit more effort and focus from the team. Both were developed with extensive collaboration from stakeholders. The Green Buildings Ordinance was voter initiated. I can't stress that enough. The city did not put the Green Buildings Ordinance out there and impose something on the community. The community came and voted in the Green Roof Initiative, which was written for Toronto, and then the city came in and shaped that because it was voted in and respected that vote. The city shaped it to meet Denver's climate and Denver's goals and make the provisions achievable by our building community and our development community. Similarly, the Denver Green Code is shaped for the Denver community goals as well. And both are being used to inform where we go with our base code. We're watching which compliance options get selected on the Green Buildings Ordinance, just like we'll watch what gets selected in the Denver Green Code, so we understand what's easy and what's hard. There are options in both. We love options. There are 9 options for compliance with the Green Buildings Ordinance for new buildings as well as for existing. There are 4 options for compliance with the Denver Green Code. The areas of focus are the same. Either holistic, sustainability, or energy efficiency kind of rise to the top, and then there are other similar related priorities that come in there as well. At the end of the day, both are aiming to exceed code. The Denver Green Code just aims to pull the projects a little bit farther above code. The Green Buildings Ordinance aims to pull more projects a little bit above the base code. And they're both aiming to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We want to support the Denver community's health and our longevity as a community, and that's what these ordinances are about. So I already really talked about the Green Buildings Ordinance essentials. One key thing that gets missed by a lot of teams is that there are 2 parts to it. There's the cool roof portion and the options portion. Exemption from one does not equate to exemption from the other. Both have to be addressed, but projects can be exempt from one or both. Early trends from what we've seen with the Green Buildings Ordinance is over half of the projects that have come through, both existing and new, have chosen the energy efficiency options. So that's good news for us with the IECC coming up in 2021. We know that there is potential for some conversation about painless improvements with energy performance before we start getting to the conversation about what might be a little bit painful but doable, where can we stretch. So that's great. And we have permitted approximately, or I should say we did permit in the first year approximately 65 projects, and we've been continuing since the first of this year as well. There are consistently 30 to 70 in the queue, so teams are not afraid of this ordinance. They're not afraid of submitting for permit under this ordinance. Average review cycles are just over 2 reviews. That's not bad either. That means that the community is doing a really good job of understanding the ordinance and giving us projects that comply. We're using the Green Buildings Ordinance to teach us about how buildings are performing from an energy standpoint relative to how they're predicted to perform. And what we've learned is that there's a big gap. And we don't want to put blame on the gap. We want to understand the gap and figure out how to close the gap. That's obviously the goal. We want to get to outcomes that perform. So we're asking for that predicted DEUI on all of our green buildings ordinance submittals so that we can work on developing the community's energy intuition. We want design teams talking about EUI. We want design teams to know what energy use intensity is and what would be expected for their building type, so that when they look on the benchmarking ordinance website and see a number, they know if it's high or low, good or bad, if the building is performing or not. I put a couple slides up here. I won't spend too much time hanging around in them, but just this one I'll talk about for a second. It's an example of a building that had a predicted EUI of 29, and last year it recorded an energy use actual EUI of 75.2. So that's more than 2 times what was predicted, and it's higher than the national median for its building type. And this is a building that achieved LEED Gold. It achieved WELL Gold. The designers were considering zero net energy during the design phases. There's a low window to wall ratio. There are a lot of things in its favor, and it's still not performing. So we really want to understand why that's happening, and I'll flip through these other examples to get to some theories about why it's happening. We're asking the community to tell us their opinion on why they think it's happening. So every time we get a green buildings ordinance submittal, I ask, what's your PEUI, and how accurate do you think it's going to be, and what do you think is going to contribute to the inaccuracies? It's everybody on the team. It's not any one person. It's easy to say bad energy model or bad design team, but it's really not just about the design. It's about the owner, how the building's operated, how it's constructed, whether or not the details are carried out the way that they were planned, if the facilities team understands the equipment that's there, and if the occupants are using the building as intended. So teams that are getting approval are considering all of the options early. They're engaging the owner in that discussion so the priorities for the project are maintained. They're reading the rules and regulations on the Green Buildings Ordinance. That's really awesome when they do that. And they're communicating with us. My phone number's on our website. I answer questions all the time. So I do have frequently asked questions. I suspect that I have gone over, so I'm going to skip through them and just say that we have a technical advisory committee that is providing clarifications, but we're not rewriting anything. So there should be no concerns about things being rewritten, and we're bringing a Green Buildings Ordinance inspector on board to help us with making sure that buildings are complying out in the field. Thank you.